Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And it's funny because whenever you hear your own bio shared with you, it's always a little strange because nobody would ever have thought that spending a decade in financial services doing content and marketing would put me in this kind of a position today. But in fact, that is where I fell in love with content governance because, of course, we had lots of content governance. And I found out how amazing it was. But we'll share that story in a minute. But first, I want to do a little bit of an informal poll. So this isn't, we're not pushing a real Zoom poll, but just take a look at this list. This is from a survey that I conducted, I fielded this time last year, asking folks what kinds of foundational tools and templates they currently use. So, do you have an AI usage policy, a brand voice chart, content request form, content style guide, any content creation templates, a creative brief, distribution checklist, documented approval creation or distribution workflows, documented content strategy, editorial calendar, taxonomy, or none of these. So probably, I'm guessing that hopefully on this kind of a call, you have some of these. Nobody's going to have all of these. I don't have all of these. Okay. I mean, there have been organizations where I have had all of these. Hello, the financial services company. But in general, these are things that, it takes time to build up to. But I'm hoping you have at least some of these. And now I'm not going to tell you the results yet because I want to give you the opportunity. If that kind of piqued your interest, I do have that's question number 10 in a content scalability, readiness assessment. So you can go ahead and use bit.ly/capital E Erica 0407. Go in there and you can take this for yourself, and it will kind of show you where you are in your maturity as far as being ready to scale. Now, these are the results. So this was from about 300 folks who took the survey. You could pick as many of the items as you actually used. And of course, the important thing to see here is that out of the 300 people, we had 3.8%, none of these. So there are people who were interested in the topic, went through the whole survey, and didn't have any of these foundational items in place, not one. The one that the most people are using was editorial calendar. But even by most, I mean 70%. That's a C, guys. That is not what we would want to see. We would want to see much better than that. Wouldn't we all like to see people with a style guide and templates and all that? Because when you don't have any of that in place, you're making your life so much harder because every piece of content has to go across your desk to make sure that it's reflecting your brand and that it's reflecting your objectives and the goals that you've set for your organization that your content strategy needs to actually achieve.
Now, Erica, quick
Yes.
question.
Yes.
You mentioned a URL on the previous slide. Can we go back to that really quick so I can type it into the chat?
Yes. It
Okay,
should
HTTPS
bit.ly.
bit.ly Eric 0407. Thank you
Yep.
so much.
My pleasure. Sorry about that. I should have stopped to let you do that.
No worries.
But I
Okay,
like to just give the pause.
continue on.
So I think we all fundamentally know that you can't scale what you haven't defined, but it can feel overwhelming. Like, I get it. That list is a little overwhelming. It's a lot of things, right? And you have so much work you have to get done, but you really aren't ever going to be able to scale past everything having to go across your desk until you start chipping away and start building those content foundations. I feel very, very strongly that content governance is what allows you to scale and what allows you to do things like take vacations and not work on the weekends. So these are very important things that I think, especially with how much is going on for all of us every single day, you need to not be the one carrying around the brand voice and tone in your head. You can't be that arbiter who's saying, here's the process. If you've ever been in a situation where you weren't the one laid off, but your boss was, And they felt like all of the value they gave to the organization was their internalization of all of these arcane rules and processes and preferences, then you felt the pain of what it's like to not have any of that kind of documentation and governance in place. At a bare minimum, you need to have established brand guidelines, have some process workflows, and have your content structures defined. If you don't have any of that, you don't actually have anything to support your content strategy, which is how you open in those situations where you've got a fantastic content strategy that everyone was so excited about, yet nobody ever references it. And you keep being requested to do all sorts of content creation that's well outside of the scope of what your strategy should be focused on. Well, obviously, I could talk all night on this topic. I wrote a book about it because it's something I'm so passionate about, but I'm just going to be focused on the four real critical building blocks that I think if you start here, this is where you're going to be having the biggest impact on your ability to scale. So the first is having that defined taxonomy. Second is going to be identifying the right content templates that will allow you to have consistency and replicable quality in everything that you or your external or internal contributors create, having guidelines for content creation, and last but certainly not least, the documented brand voice. And I'll share with you my process, an example of what I do that's a little bit differently. So I feel strongly that content governance is the only thing that stands between your content strategy and random acts of content. Random acts of content and stamping them out is really, it's not a slogan for me. It is something that is my motto in real life. I'm one of those people that I'm trying to give everybody the tools they need to be able to say no to those really silly April Fool's joke ideas. I hope none of you had people in your organization that tried to convince you that you really needed to do a great April Fool's joke, because spoiler alert, most of them aren't really great and they're horrible and they waste everyone's time on the content team creating them. But again, until you have all of these processes in place to support your content strategy, it becomes a lot harder to say no. And I'm in the business of trying to help you be able to say no to things that you know you shouldn't be doing. All right. So we're going to start with defined taxonomy. In too many organizations, taxonomy is either something that happens based upon things that folks type into WordPress as they're building new pages or blog posts, or worse yet, it's something that the IT team owns because they own your web server. Neither of these are ideal states because your taxonomy is what allows human beings and computers to understand what your content is about, how your content is structured, who you're trying to serve, and so many other things about your organization. And if you're thinking, I don't know, how is taxonomy really that important? Well, if you've ever had to go into any kind of a content management system and you've looked through the tagging because you're trying to clean things up because you're not understanding why new content isn't showing up in the related content widget, well, it's probably because you have ebook as e dash book, ebook small e, big B, maybe ebook with a space in between, and three or four other variations. And when it comes to a lot of these dumb search systems, you're going to end up in that situation where it doesn't understand that those are all the same thing. Similarly, Google is going to give you a different line of results for every variation in capitalization and punctuation you have for some of these variations in names when people are actually trying to do the reporting. So you're actually putting yourself in a pretty bad situation if you've not taken the time to go about defining your taxonomy in a way that's going to help you and other people find related content and be able to understand how it fits in. So this is a very, very simplified example of what channel taxonomy could look like. So for example, if email is one of your primary channels, email newsletter would be just one of probably a handful of sub channels. And then for maybe every email newsletter, you could probably have an internal email newsletter, a partner email newsletter. But you're going through and you're actually documenting all of these different sub levels. This is something that is helpful not just for onboarding new human team members and agencies so that way they understand how things nest together or don't. It's also absolutely critical when you're trying to create any kind of customized AI tools where it needs to understand how whatever you're having it help you with, how that fits into the greater structure that you have in place. This is a anonymized example of a real life taxonomy that I built for a client, although I did sub in some of my stuff so that the product information was not there. Basically, you're thinking through what are all of those words that we need to use to talk about, describe, link to, and interconnect all of the content we create. So it's frequently going to be your content types, your customer journey stages, those big categories and topics, your content pillars, tags, personas, any specific product names and how they should be used, and industries. So having all of this kind of information in one centralized place and making sure that every time you need to identify any of these items that they're using the same nomenclature is what is going to be the key to having things being able to be associated with each other. So that's the highest level, probably taxonomy chat you'll ever hear. But I think it's important to just start with that because until you have all of the taxonomy defined, you really can't get into defining the rest of the workflows, templates, and all of the other elements that you want to have in place. Because you've got to start with what is it that you're trying to do? Who are you trying to reach? All those good things that you outlined in the content strategy and bringing it to life. So once you've done that, then you can start looking at structured content templates. And the reason that these are so important is this is how you're going to ensure that every time you create any kind of content, so for example, every blog post, every email, every social media post, that you have that consistency in branding and in messaging, that you understand in advance what the right workflow is. So there's no wondering, hey, am I allowed to approve this and publish this, or does this need to go through other lines of approval? Having all that kind of stuff up front is what gets you to the scalable content creation that you're looking for. It's also going to help you with your content repurposing because you can probably even do some of it within that template. Because if you're creating structured content templates, you're going to be having some of those kinds of reusable elements in any given piece that'll be able to be put to use for other pieces of derivative content. Now, I know a lot of times people can feel let's say, hesitant about the idea of introducing templates into content, because after all, creating content, especially if you have a background as a writer, I trained as a magazine journalist, so I love interviewing folks, telling stories. You want to have that creative freedom. But the thing is, I also don't want to have to remember all of the different fields that go into each of the different company CMSs that I need to be using as somebody who does freelance and consulting work. I don't want to have to remember whether or not my friend Carmen's company uses, sentence case for H3 and below, or who it is that does and doesn't use the Oxford comma. None of that is information that I provide value by holding my head. At 100% is something, though, that needs to be in place for that consistency and for efficiency. And that's why it belongs in a template. If you can reduce your cognitive load because you're not having to remember all of those pesky details that really don't need to be in your brain, it's going to make it easier for you to get your work done. And you're going to be able to collaborate without having to go back to whoever that gatekeeper is or whoever that smartest person is in the room that you always would have to go to otherwise. So I've really come around in my thinking, and now I love a good template because anything that I don't have to remember that I can have in front of myself so I'm not starting with a blank page, it's going to get me to where I want to go with my content so much faster. Now, I like to think of it a little bit as having a content template capsule wardrobe. So, capsule wardrobes, the idea is that you can kind of mix and match things, that there's recurring elements, that there's everything is meant to work together. And when I view content templates, it's the same kind of a deal. It's not that every template looks completely different because they don't. In fact, a lot of these templates have very, very similar or shared elements. For example, the content request form is the intake form where you would get lots of information from whoever is requesting that you create some content in advance. So that way you're not having to trade extensive emails or go back and forth on Slack, etc. The content brief is similar to a content request, except that it comes after you've decided you are, in fact, going to create that content. So it's a little bit further down the food chain. And so it's going to have different items that are included in it. I personally like to combine the content brief with some of the channel content creation templates that I recommend, because that way you have all of that information that you need to be keeping top of mind right there at the top of that brief. So you're not having to go and look in another document. Of course, that means it's going to take a little bit of a scroll to get through all of the things. But to me, there's such value in having those things together. And lastly, content distribution. It's probably the least used, least common type of template that I've seen in my work that I've done across organizations. But again, why do you need to remember all of the different places that you should be promoting something that's partner related when your template could just tell you, right? Hope you guys are with me on that one. So, this is an example of a content request form from a client that very clearly was a SaaS company targeting marketers. Now, this is too many personas. I'm just going to say that, okay? This is too many personas. But on the flip side, I feel like what they really were doing here is they were kind of combining audience persona along with the key problem that somebody was bringing to market that they were going to solve. Because realistically, they did not have this many personas defined. So, we're going to but I like this though because it does have the gravitas of, okay, everything that everybody thinks we should be talking about to who we're putting it here. And then they are doing that audience job level segmentation and having that there so you understand who you're talking to exactly for the segmentation. But they go down and they have a lot of information and it's very easy to check off. It doesn't ask anyone to know what they need to tell you. It literally walks you through having you go and fill in the blanks. And they would have a version of this information that would go with assets along the way. So that way there wouldn't be that disconnect between written content and visuals. And when it comes to your content brief, the way that it differs from that intake form is you're providing all of that context. And in my opinion, that this is probably one of the most important pieces for stamping out the random acts of content just by default. Because if someone cannot get through a meeting with you where you're able to craft a brief together, how on earth could you possibly create the content, right? That's when you're going to have that, hey, maybe we're not going to do this meeting. Could you start with asking, what is the job this piece of content needs to do? And if there is no job for this piece of content to do, you absolutely should not be creating it. Second, you want to understand the stage. How familiar is the person who's going to be consuming this content with you and with the problems that your organization solves and with your offering? Do you have any proof points, be they internal or external, that will help you make your case? And if so, what are those citations? What audience very specifically are you trying to reach? And don't take everybody as an answer because content being created for everybody is obviously content that's created for nobody. We've all heard that a million times because it is true. Also, you want to have a call to action. One thing that you want the audience to do, not 8 things that you want the audience to do, because that's too many. And that key message, what is the one thing that you want somebody to come away from this piece of content thinking, remembering, and carrying with them to think about you? Now, when it comes to content creation and submission templates, these are going to be the kind of thing where you don't necessarily need all of these, but you do need them for any piece of content where there's a lot of moving parts and lots of must include information that reflects different content types and different content channels. The very obvious example for this is your web content is going to have reminders about what's going to make something findable through AI and through search, all the SEO elements your CMS needs, any design elements or process that goes through there. So a web template is going to be one of those pretty great low-hanging fruit pieces that I always suggest people want to do quickly. Blog posts are going to be very similar to web content, but then you're also probably going to have sections at the bottom for social content that is part of promoting the blog post. So that way you're not asking somebody to go back well after the post has been created to create the derivative content. You're doing it all at one time. Same thing for emails, ebooks, landing pages, and social media posts, where you might have templates that remind the best practices by platform, have post recipes for things that you do a very specific way every single time, such as new hires, awards, and comment and PR mentions, things like that. Just having those things documented and in a format that somebody can easily lift makes it so much easier to keep everyone on the same page and keep everything consistent, even when you have multiple people creating the content. Content distribution checklists. This is one of those things that I wish that I'd had my entire life, because every time I've worked somewhere, I've always been kind of trying to find out about, well, what are all the things? And you try to cobble it together, and invariably somebody would, at the last minute in a meeting, say, oh, well, don't forget you need to share this with, and they would tell us about some other internal activation point that we had no idea about, even though we thought we were pretty embedded with our business partners. This happened at so many different organizations, which is why now, as a part of any engagement I do, and when I was still in-house, I started doing as part of my first 90 days on the job, is I made a point of going around and finding out all those places where we had been sharing content, and then you just put it all together. This is also really helpful if you are in a large organization where you find that people are always asking for additional additional promotion points. Like they want to, obviously, anybody who has a new product launch, they want to get it out everywhere. But what if you have multiple product launches and lots of recurring communication efforts that you're doing? It can be really overwhelming for your audience if you're in that position where you have too many people going out at once. So having a content distribution checklist also allows you to prioritize by type. So that way you can create different versions based upon the size of a launch, a regional audience, or other kinds of considerations that are relevant for your organization. So of course you can have even more templates than that. And you're not going to ever have all of the templates. Templates are going to multiply like tribbles, which is a good thing. But those are just some places where you can start. Now, some of the really great meaty parts that I think are so helpful for scaling your content strategy and really making sure that you're bringing it to life. The biggest thing is having an amazing style guide. I can't even tell you how painful it is when you don't have a style guide, especially if you're doing any kind of ghostwriting for other people, because it's really demotivating if you're creating content and then you get back so many notes from folks that are about very specific personal preferences that you had no idea about. Having a really solid content style guide that has all the information that anybody creating content would ever want to know about your audience, your brand colors, but all of that kind of stuff through the content lens, the where can I get the template fors, what is our perspective on how we do all of these things and what do we not do? Having all of that stuff in one place that can then also, of course, be loaded into any kind of technology that you're using as part of your process. It's just so useful and so helpful. And I will actually look at that. I will find that URL at the end of our conversation and I'll paste it here. But you can also just email me at erikaheald.com if you'd like a copy of my style guide template. It's something that I worked on with a lot of input from members of the content chat community, because it's one of those things that we wanted to really get a good feel for what multiple people had put together in style guides and to create a template that you can use to create that minimum viable style guide, have that place to start and just keep adding to it because you're never going to be finished with your style guide. I just can't imagine that you ever would be. Now, social media guidelines, when I'm talking about them for this particular conversation, I don't mean the, hey, here's what you can and can't say on social. I mean, why are you on social? Which channels you engage on, who you're trying to talk to on those particular channels, and what you need them to do. A great example would be on LinkedIn, if you're a B2B business, you're trying to get people to interact with your company. You want to be driving people to your website. You want to be getting people to actually be willing to take your calls. You have very specific things that you're trying to do that's going to be very different than if you're a B2C company on Instagram, where maybe you are just looking to get people talking about your brand, resharing your content, or doing, very direct shopping. Whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish on those social channels, just taking the time to actually map out what the purpose is, how you're going to activate that on this channel. Having all that stuff in place is going to be the difference between consistently creating great content with a large team and ending up in a situation where every time a different person writes content for social, it feels like a completely new personality has entered the building. And that's not what folks are looking for. They want to have that consistency and that same know you feeling every time they hit your feed. Last but not least, you do need that documented content strategy. And if you feel like it's too hard to do because too many things are going to change, this is my minimum viable content strategy plan on a page where you're just talking at a really high level what your objectives, goals, strategy, metrics, and differentiators are. I've used this basic template with organizations of all sizes to help them dig into what they're trying to accomplish with their content. And it can get a lot longer than this. It's always going to have backup tabs or documentation guidelines that support all of this. But this is where you really are putting it all together, where you're saying, this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do differently, this is how we'll know that it's working. You have to have all these things in place if you're going to scale, because if you don't, then you don't know that you were successful. All you can do is report on what happened. And that's not something you can actually then replicate. Now, this is going to be the hardest part, in my opinion, is documenting workflows. I'm not so good with the graphs and charts kind of a thing. But I think in any situation, you can at least just start typing it out with where do you start for any of these big kinds of things that you do, especially if it's something you don't do all the time. Like if you have an annual report you produce, if you do videos every so often, if you have an annual conference, any of those things in particular, it's so important to go through and map out all the different things that need to get done and what the steps are in those processes. For things like a blog post, it could be pretty simple. It could be a very short workflow. But for something like putting together the website for your big annual event or for even a webinar, that's probably going to be a lot more involved and involve more people. But what's great is after you take the time to create this kind of a workflow, all you have to do over time is update it. And I know you're thinking, yeah, but first, Erica, I have to find the time to do this. But it's so rewarding when you do this kind of work. And even after you've left an organization, they're still using these things. I personally had that experience because a couple of months ago, I spoke with a coworker who I've not worked with for 15 years now. And she let me know that some of those exact same content templates with the embedded workflows that I had created for any kind of urgent communication that needed to go up on the website, company was still using them. Of course, the people involved, all of those things changed, but the core fundamentals, the core basic copy, all still exactly the same because you don't need to rethink some of these things as much as we might think we do. You can have those things done one time and then just keep updating them, and it will continue to pay off for a really long time. Which, okay, maybe you don't anticipate being with your current company for the next 10, 15 years, but I personally like the feeling that something I created that I spent the time on is still being used, even though I'm no longer there. That makes me pretty happy. Now, brand voice is something I've talked about a ton because it's one of the really like the first differentiators when it comes to your content and how people are perceiving content coming from your brand. If you haven't taken the step to create your brand voice chart and you just sort of play it by ear and you'll know it when you hear it, I'd really like to challenge you to at least take those steps of defining your brand personality traits, those three things that are just essentially what makes your content sound like it's coming from you. And then outline do's and don'ts and build a chart. Now, you're probably wondering, why do we need a chart? Why you said you weren't somebody who was into all these workflows and things. But here's the other thing. I cannot tell you how frequently I've been in organizations that have told me their core brand attributes or traits and what their voice was. And then when we've tried to use that voice, then there's been pushback and we can't get anything improved. The example that always comes to mind for me is the word irreverent. Every startup that I've worked with that wanted to disrupt things also wanted to be irreverent. Now, the problem is some people, their idea of irreverent is snarky and mean. Like Wendy's can be kind of snarky and mean sometimes, right? They're definitely irreverent. But a lot of times, what people mean by irreverent is gently poking fun at the establishment, or in the words of one CEO I worked with, just meaning having, different ideas, coming up with a different example, not doing what everyone else is doing, which isn't what most of us would think irreverent means. But here's the deal. If you build a chart like this, and this is a sample, an excerpt of a brand voice chart that I've used, this is what brings it to life. So that way you're not arguing over the fine points of what these words mean, and you actually are giving people a practical way to know that they're bring those attributes to life. So for the example of if you're trying to put out into the world that you are trusted experts, so you were saying one of your attributes is expert. Okay. That means you're going to demonstrate and communicate industry knowledge and professionalism. So, yep, you're going to use industry terminologies, but you don't want to use unnecessary jargon. Okay. So it's, that's a balancing act. But you're going to make sure that you always back up statements with facts or experiences. So you're not going to make unfounded claims. You're not just going to make things up because they sound directionally right. I have worked places where they didn't always cite sources. If you're trying to be an expert in your field, you absolutely have to cite that source. And that source needs to be a relevant, legitimate, current source. Because here's a really terrible thing. When you see a stat and it looks so amazing, and you're like, oh, I want to use that stat, and it's not cited. Sometimes it's because somebody made it up because, well, that's about what our data showed us. Don't be making stuff up. But again, those things may seem really obvious to you or me, but I've certainly been on the other side of things and gotten in content created by people where these things weren't necessarily so obvious, depending upon what that voice trait is. So I think it's so critical to, at the baseline, start by putting all of these small items in place, the do's and don'ts, how you define it, and what those attributes are. And over time, you can build on this by adding in links to content that does an amazing job of articulating these things or illustrating them, or even places where you stepped in it, because guess what? We all mess up sometimes, and that can be helpful for folks to see too. All right. So now, when it comes to putting all this together and how it can kind of work to help you actually start scaling so that way you are not necessarily the gatekeeper of that content strategy, that it's out there in the world, it's out there with all of the teams across your organization. Everyone's using it, everyone's using the foundation you put together. I like to think of the content governance framework, I like to think of it through this AAA model that I developed, which is align, adopt, and amplify. So the alignment is after you've, gotten things in place and you are getting ready to, you're ready, you need to do this work. You have to find those people in the organization that are going to be your champions because you're going to need to be able to put the time on the calendar that you can actually get this work done. So think about the groups who will most benefit from having this consistency. Because it's not going to just be marketing, it's going to also be your customer teams are going to be getting lots out of this work. If, excuse me, if you work in any kind of organization that has a lot of folks doing service or doing technical support, those folks will benefit greatly from this as well. But look through all of the organizations that create content of any type in your organization and see who you can bring to the table who will support what you're doing and will help actually get the word out about the why and the benefit, the what's in it for me. That's really going to make it work. So with those folks, you can actually clarify the purpose and priorities of having content governance and then work on putting together an audit where you look at what you have in place and you actually then prioritize what you're going to do next. For the adoption portion of this, that's when you and your working group are going to get in there and define those workflows, document roles, implement tools, conduct training, create that accountability. That's where, after you've gotten all of the foundational elements in place, your minimum viable content governance framework, once you have all those items in place, that's when you can move on to amplify, when you're going to be able to look at what has changed positively because of having governance in place. You might be able to say that you have shortened your timeframes for creating different kinds of content. Perhaps you've created workflows that are much more efficient because instead of having a separate social media content creator over here create content from scratch, you're having whoever wrote the initial piece of content write a few ideas based upon your social content template for some social that could support disseminating that content. And maybe you also have them write the email draft too. What are any of those kinds of things that you can say are demonstrable value that can be tied back to your content foundations? And of course, once you have those things in place and you have those measurement tools, that's when you're going to go back and refine and iterate and expand and can scale with more technology and with more people. And I'm just, for me, this is so fantastic when you can get to that point. But it is going to be kind of that ever evolving process as you do roll out with new teams and move into new groups. Now, of course, one thing that almost every content team that I've worked with has been asked is to figure out how they can start working with more AI tools. Hopefully, for your organizations, you're not being asked how you can use AI tools to replace humans or to create content from scratch, because that's horrible and none of us would ever want any of that. But AI has its place. And I think that the biggest benefits of taking your strong content foundation, taking that governance program, having it in place before you're doing a large scale AI content workflow integration is you're going to be able to have the right context in place so that the AI actually becomes something that helps you instead of being something that just creates more work for you. Because I don't know if you saw the article, I think it was in last month's Harvard Business Review, a lot of folks were finding that implementing AI was not saving them any time. It was, in fact, just giving them more work, not just the rework of things that were created by AI that were off the mark, but just people are expecting that you work all the time because it's so easy. Or that they're expecting, oh, well, now one person can do all of these things. But that's not the case. Really, what the value is it's going to be able to be guard implement your guardrails enforce your brand guidelines, tell you how you can be doing a little bit better job with your consistency. You can take all of those guidelines and you can ask AI, how good of a job did we do on creating content that's aligned with what we said we're going to do? It's also really helpful when you create one version of something and you say, hey, if I want to tailor this for this other audience, how can I reposition this? Like, what are the core needs that I should be reflecting in this instead? It's going to be great for helping you with that as well. Of course, when it comes to data analysis about behaviors and preferences, or even telling you that triggers are available, that's also going to be something that's going to be so impactful. So again, I do think that AI is really helpful, but I think it is so much more helpful when you have that strong content foundation in place so that way it understands what's different about your brand and what makes your company and your company's content demonstratively different than what everyone else is doing. Because if you don't have it in place, if you don't have that strong foundation, then you're just going to be creating pretty mediocre, pretty boring content. So when it comes to what I think are the ideal initial AI use cases for showing the impact of governance specifically on how AI can be used across the content team, I think content ideation can be really helpful when you give it all of your templates and tools and give it your data on what's been working well. Ask it to tell you what some of your gaps are. Are there any audiences you're neglecting? Are there any roles that you're trying to reach or any needs that your audience has that you just haven't been reflecting in your content ideation? Have it be that gut check. Similarly, I do not enjoy writing meta descriptions. I'm not judging anybody who does, but it's just not my favorite part of the day. So I frequently will use it for things like generating the first drafts of that. I'll ask it, hey, what is it better with my data that my SEO data from my tools in hand? I'll ask it, how should I position this to differentiate it from this other content we have that we don't want to cannibalize? I will ask the AI to help me mine my own data, to mine my own content I've already created, to make sure that I'm creating SEO copy that will help this content be found and be understood in the context of our other offerings. Similarly, content review. It's kind of like having that really great colleague who was able to read real quickly and always had fantastic ideas for how you could take something that you created and just make it that little bit better. It's such a great coach and tool for reviewing your content and giving you those ideas. And of course, content reuse and repurposing is one of my favorites. It can take some tweaking, but you can actually train it to do quite a few interesting, especially really well structured reuse um, projects. For example, for our content chat live stream every week, I don't create a bespoke set of show notes after it. Instead, we have a really nice input form that we've created in a custom tool, and it spits out those show notes for me, which is fantastic. I know that they're going to be on brand, they're going to be consistent, and it's going to reflect what was actually in the transcription from the conversation and not just things that the AI made up. So these to me are some of the really easy, low-hanging fruits. Now, I promised at the top of all this that you'd have a roadmap for scaling your content. That's one of the promises in the description for the session. And so these are your next steps. Depending upon where you are in your journey, depending upon whether or not you're like, oh, Erica, I have all of those things in place. This is so amazing. Or if you're like, oh gosh, we haven't really started on a lot of these things, this is still to me the how to get going with going from starting your foundation to being ready to scale. Start by doing that baseline audit of what you already have and then prioritizing the things that you should do next. If you don't already have taxonomy in that baseline audit, that's when, take the time to do that minimum viable taxonomy. So just like the spreadsheet example I showed you, where you just go through those, reusable chunks of content information that you need to get right, that you want to keep consistent, and that will 100% shape the way that search and AI views you and your organization and what you do. Templates. Start with like three core templates. And I'd say do that content request form, the content brief, and the distribution sheet. Because these three, they're just core to what you're going to be doing every single day. And when it comes to making sure that you bring your content strategy to life, these are the ones that can do so much heavy lifting for you. So I absolutely implore you to start there. And then, of course, and usually I would tell people to do the brand voice chart first. But the thing is for this audience, I think you probably need to do those other things first because you probably already have a voice that you're working with. You're probably already pretty used to it. But if you're looking to scale, you need to have that brand voice actually documented in a way that helps people make the bridge the gap between what the brand stands for and how that turns up in the content we create, how we create it, and what we do differently from the other people who are creating content in our space. Fifth step, doing those workflows. So just doing some lightweight workflows for your most frequently occurring or most infrequently occurring work, depending upon whatever's going to have the biggest impact. And last but not least, that's when you're ready to finally scale. So iterate, refine, and scale all of these elements across all of the different teams that you're working with so you can finally have no more random acts of content, and also not have everything come across your desk anymore, which I think is flippin' amazing. So I know in the chat we shared my URL. On the site, there's also on the homepage, there's a bunch of free resources you can use to kind of get started with thinking through what you need for your content foundation. And this is all of my contact info because I'm always happy to talk more about content strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica. I love
Thanks. My
this great
pleasure.
information shared from clearly tons of great experience. I'm going to let Ariel kind of queue up. We had a couple of questions with things we might want to go a little deeper on. If anyone has additional questions, please feel free to keep dropping them in the chat, but take it away, Ariel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first place we want to go really has to do with um the question asked by Christy. Has anyone ever experimented with plugging in brand voice and tone guidelines into an AI tool and having it check new written content for consistency?
I do that all the time. And I
Right?
actually, what I love about this is I worked with a Pacific Northwest financial technology company, and they were being forced to just use Copilot. It happens to a lot of folks. No offense, Seattleites. I
Yes.
know everyone has Copilot, but it's a little bit harder because frequently people won't have Copilot Studio. So the situation they were in is nobody on their team, on marketing team, had the ability to really build any kind of custom tools. So they had me as the consultant use only public facing information, everything non-confidential, but I 100% put in all of that public facing information, including all of the new branding imperatives. And I trained the tool on their brand voice and tone, and then gave them the link to that custom tool so that they could use it. So, but it was something that was blessed. So they were not putting in anything that wasn't, allowed. So they weren't breaking any of their rules, but they had to have me, the consultant, create the tool because they didn't have access. But what happened is since they were doing a rebrand, it was so helpful for folks because it helped them shift some of their thinking and some of those words. Because when you have people that have worked for a company for a long time, you know how you always say it, right? There's a way that we always say it. There's this, there's a product name that we've had forever. And
Yes.
yeah, we were trying to reposition it, but you keep slipping. Well, the AI doesn't slip and it calls you on it. And it says, oh, this is really good, but don't you also mean this? Or, hey, is this really relevant? This feels like a kind of wimpy word. And I thought you were trying to be, more powerful than that. So I love doing that.
I
Yeah,
wonder if you
that's
find,
really
oh,
excellent use.
sorry, Ariel.
Go
I was
ahead.
just wondering if you find, Erica, that it's kind of like hearing it from someone else versus you, sort of when it's like, well, it isn't me, it's
People are
it's this
so
very
much more
powerful
open
engine.
to it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh, well,
yeah.
the AI said that I should, make this change, so I'm going to do it. Versus that witch, Erica, can you believe what she put on, the comment, the feedback she gave me? I've never heard somebody say anything like that about AI feedback. And
Uh,
I've been tempted sometimes to be like, oh, the AI said you should. But I haven't done that. I've been tempted though. The dark side has tempted me. Note the purple lightsaber.
I just was noticing that, and I hadn't seen it before, but I was kind of looking at your background there. That's funny. Anyway,
yeah.
sorry, Ariel, go ahead. I know there was at least another question there.
Um, yeah, they were talking a little bit about tools like Grammarly Pro
Hmm.
and things like that. Um, do you leverage tools like that, Erica?
Every single day.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Grammarly Pro is my BFF. I do not ever just accept all. I accept um, I always make
I
considered things that
curate
I
it.
accept, but
Yes.
it's so helpful and um it's really encouraging to you too, because it'll tell you when you've been on a writing streak, it'll tell you, how many words you wrote. So it's really nice when you do the kind of work like many of us do that can feel a little bit like maybe at the end of the week you're like, did I even get anything done? And then you get your peppy little Grammarly email telling you how many words you used and how many unique words you used, and you're like, yeah, I'm earning my keep. I'm making a difference in the world.
Yes.
Um, but it is actually very helpful. The other AI tool that I probably use the most is Beautiful.ai. It's what I use to make these slides. Not that I asked it to create the content, the copy or anything, but I'm not a designer and I don't have a designer on my team of me. So, I put in what I'm doing and it auto-magically makes it all align and look nice. So I am a big fan of using any of these kinds of tools whenever you can. I am not a fan, though, of using something like ChatGPT to create a slide. It does such a terrible job. It did create, though, the image that I used of the capsule wardrobe. It took it a little bit of time before it understood because certain other AI tools out there had been really heavily promoting the idea of capsule wardrobes for spring lately, and they kept putting out these images that are of an outfit, which is not what a capsule wardrobe is. So it seemed to have confused the AI.
Yes, that I see that a lot happening.
So you know what I mean, because
I
you're
know
obviously being
exactly.
targeted with the similar ads.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, we did have a question from David. Um, any advice on aligning multiple marketing teams across varied business units with, at times, dissimilar goals on the value of these foundational principles and tools?
Hello, welcome to my whole past working life. I was at Charles Schwab for 10 non-consecutive years. I burned out because I was there from 2000 to 2003, survived 7 rounds of layoffs, and then finally said I need a break. And then I went back for 7 more years, and that's what it was like all the time. And I
Oh,
have to tell you, we ended up in a situation where while we were able to do a lot of that kind of reconciliation work, we actually did have to do one big split, which was really keeping the B2B and the B2C more separate, which was hard because we would go back and forth between marketing being a shared service or marketing being in the business, marketing being centralized. Like we went all over the place with how marketing um, worked within the group. I was always on the B2B side. And where we ended up is, we weren't able to use some of the foundational elements that they put in place because they didn't reflect the realities of our business units, where we were sometimes B2B to C, we were sometimes white labeled. We were not out there the same way that the B2C side of the business was. So sometimes you are going to have to say, we can't all be together. But I'll tell you from the internal standpoint, 100% we were. Because I did spend some time again, on the B2B side, but doing internal content and communication support for the business leader who ran that unit. And all of that, all of the communicators across the organization did come together and we were able to share tools and resources, et cetera. So I think it may sometimes be it may sometimes be possible to do on a role-based level, even if it's not able to be done across all the divisions. But it's probably going to depend on a case-by-case basis, which is a bummer. Because in a perfect world, it should work across the whole organization. But depending upon how large your organization is, it might not.
Yeah.
So I have a little follow-up question to that,
Mhm.
actually, Erica. And then I know we're going to get on to our book giveaway, but that was kind of a good segue, when you talk about trying to kind of work cross-organizationally. What of all of your sort of foundational principles, which are sort of hardest to sort of sell in, or where has your experience with this, where have you found that you've kind of met the most resistance in terms of things like style guides and templates and workflows?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a great question. I love that one. I would say in the largest organization I worked with, it was the style guide. I was not allowed to have a style guide. We could not agree upon a style guide because every single person had different opinions about whether you should use first or last name on, second reference to a human, whether or not we needed to have all five of somebody's, professional designations after their name. Like just some of those things we fundamentally could not agree upon. So they wouldn't let me have a style guide. Okay, fine. Um, but most of the startups I worked with, they loved that because they liked the idea that there would be this independent, this is what we decided, this is the rule. They liked having that. Um, I would say templates are frequently a hard sell because people who are creative are worried that, oh, you're just giving me a bunch of rules, so I'm just going to have to create generic content and I'm not going to be able to have any freedom. And once I show people the examples of the kinds of templates I create and how I think about it, then they realize it's not what I'm trying to do at all. I specifically worked with one very, very small team where everyone in the organization got to give feedback on every piece of content, like every web page, everything, because it was, bootstrapped startup, 7 people on me. And we couldn't get emails approved because everyone wanted to make edits to emails, and it was horrible. So eventually, I created a template for emails where we had 4 templates and it was based upon what is the job of the email. This is an email that we're sending out to try to get people to register for a webinar. Here's the job of the first sentence. Here's the job of the second sentence. Here's the job of this section, like literally mapping it out like that. And once we went through that exercise, I was able to finally get um, out of that kind of conflict with the engineers on the team and the CTO, who really they had a lot of feelings about marketing. And once they understood that marketing wasn't just a bunch of pretty words, that in fact we were trying to do specific things, then they were able to back off. So that was one thing, like nobody wanted it. They thought it was dumb. And I'm like, well, I am your consultant, and if you don't want to pay me for this work after I do it, fine, because I knew that once they saw it, that they would love it and be like, oh, because it's what they needed because they weren't understanding because it looked too easy
Yeah.
when I would just write something. They're like, well, this could be, let's just do these 50 things.
Right.
So they just needed the map. They needed the schematic.
Yeah, right. All
Awesome.
right.
Any
Well, I
other
believe,
questions
oh, sorry.
for Erica? Great.
No, I believe we have a winner. Tony, do you want to talk about, or do you want to
Yeah, absolutely.
announce?
Thanks everybody for submitting your info, and thank you, Erica, as well. So the website for the book is contentfoundationsbook.com. Drop that in the chat as well. But we did a little random number generator with all the entrants. It came up with number 9, which is Francis Meeker. Congratulations, Francis. We've got your email address. We've got your mailing address. So book will be your way soon. And if you wanted a copy of the book, again, contentfoundationsbook.com, also in the chat.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks everyone for being here tonight. Thank you, Erika, for your
Pleasure.
time and for sharing your experience, your information, your guidance.
And the
Great stuff.
framework.
Everybody,
And
please.
my quietest dog ever. He's, I don't
Been
know,
very good. Yeah.
not a stuffed dog.
And just a reminder, everybody, keep your eye on our website, our Slack channel, our LinkedIn group, our meetup site. Watch for our upcoming events. We'd love to see you again. But until then, thank you and good night.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks,
Good night,
Erika.
everyone. Thank you, Erika.
Thanks.